So you're fresh out of school where exams were no big deal and projects were a breeze, and now you're stepping into the workplace where suddenly you're having a hard time even completing a single project. What is going on? Welcome back to the Work It podcast. My name is Nat, and with me, as always, is my co-host Gerald.
Yeah, and we are here to bring you another episode of The Work Feed.
So today, we're going to be talking about people who excelled in school, but now at the workplace, they're not having such a great time.
All right, and which type of student are you first?
Okay,
when you were in school?
Personally, I was amazing. Okay, I was great. No, okay, I'm not gonna lie. I was not doing well in school. Okay, my teachers, most of them don't look back on their time with me fondly, and neither do I. How about you? Were you a good student in school?
I think we must be in same company lah. Same thing. I think my teachers, if they're listening to this, they'll be wondering like, lots of questions. How did this guy make it in life? You know, how did he get to where he is today? So we're in a good company.
Yeah. But we're talking about the other side of the spectrum.
Yes.
Right? We're talking about people who in school, they were probably the people that we weren't so much associating with. But now they're in the workplace and they're struggling to make it work. Right? So we are looking at this topic because somebody on Reddit said the following. I consider myself really good in school, estimate about top 5 to 10% in 2 degrees at NUS.
Wow. Okay.
Without having to study much. Well, already I don't like this person. But when it comes to work, I really CMI, cannot make it. It feels like my own efforts and academic achievements went down the drain. So this Redditor noticed that some of their other schoolmates who maybe didn't do as well as he or she did seem to be able to apply the concepts that they learned in school much better during interviews and doing their complex work tasks during the day. So this person says, meanwhile, I only have great ideas or theories, but they fall apart during implementation. So Gerald, I wonder whether you've encountered a lot of people like this.
I think it's good that he or she actually recognizes his or her own strengths. So maybe studying certain topics or the method of studying maybe suited that person a lot more.
Right.
You know, and there are so many different rules, so many different ways of playing the game at the workplace that you got to kind of have to figure it out. You got to find a way to do your best and also get the results that you need. You know, from what I see from this comment, it's really like implementation seems to be the problem. What we've also learned is that what you learn in school, the exams, the knowledge there, sometimes when it comes to practical implementation, it's actually quite different, right?
It is, yeah. But so I wonder, right, is it just a feeling thing or is it concrete evidence that is pointing to the fact that, I am a good student, but I'm not a good worker?
Yeah, or maybe at the performance appraisal, it will be a really good opportunity to get that feedback. Because sometimes how we feel about our performance, we can be our own worst critics. So having someone like your boss, your supervisor, your colleagues, maybe lending that feedback for you on how you are doing, I think it probably lends a more objective view.
Sometimes I'll even ask my peers, right? I'll ask them like, I've noticed that you do this when you're doing this certain task. Why do you do that? Should I be doing that? Like, I do things differently. So I compare myself with the people who are on, the same plane as me, but I also check in with my supervisors to know that I am not just doing work blindly, but I'm meeting expectations as well.
Okay, yeah.
So one Redditor commented saying that you probably just lack agency. And that's fine. Not everyone can push themselves on their own, and that's probably what your B student friends have.
Okay.
What do you think about that?
I don't know whether you have met people who tell you that, I'm not, this is out of my pay grade. It's not within my job scope, so I don't do that. So maybe that's a kind of perspective when it comes to agency, that people may feel like they don't want to give their agency. And then they are perceived by others around them that they lack the agency.
Right. But then why did they do well at school then? Because, agency is not something that's confined to the workplace, right? What changed from them doing well in school and having the agency to to learn and to brush up on the things or topics that they weren't so good at, to make sure that they were achieving grades. What changed from then to the workplace where now they are lacking agency in pursuing the things that will lead them to success?
Yeah, I guess in school sometimes it's easier because maybe things are a lot more set in path, the goals are a lot more clearer, and the effort that you put in to achieve those goals seems to be more within your control. But then when it comes to the workplaces, your work is a part of somebody else's work as well. There are reporting lines, there are people you have to work and collaborate with. So there's a lot of ambiguity around how much responsibility you should have. And for someone who's just entering the workforce, sometimes it becomes a really difficult judgment call, Like how much should I do? If I do this, will I make a mistake? And if I do this, will I step on somebody else's toes? I mean, I've heard of people who struggle with being told that they're doing too much because they spoil the market,
Or these people scared to be called wayang or suck-ups.
Yes,
okay.
yes. So I do see that as well. And also, of course, people who do a little bit more without knowing the real business operations and they make a mistake.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically this lack of agency maybe comes from not understanding the entire organization and how your job fits into how the company works. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm saying that maybe the not knowing how we want to respond in the organization prevents us from fully giving our agency.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's just so complicated.
Well, someone else commented that, it might be another issue, giving their own experience. So this Redditor said, I excelled in school up until uni, where I completely flopped because I didn't take my own education into my own hands and always followed the structure provided by the school. I quickly switched up to be more proactive, and I'm doing pretty well now in my career.
I think this comment really hits home the point about the agency earlier. I think when we learn to take ownership and we learn to be more invested in trying to look for solutions rather than follow processes. It sounds like this person maybe started to look for solutions outside of the box and not just following what the process required of the person,
But then I wonder, right, that feels like going above and beyond my job scope. What if I'm the kind of person that has a job and I just treat it like a job? Like I clock in 9 a.m., I clock out 6 p.m., and I'm fine with that, right?
What you just said is the present day tension that we see at the workplaces.
Okay.
This tension that we see is people would say that, it's not, I'm not paid to do that much, this is the limit, or I don't need to take more responsibilities. But on the other side, the managers and the organization, they expect more, right? They will be looking at how proactive you are, how much initiative you place. And some of these things become the inherent unspoken indicators for performance, for promotion, for reward. I say this is tension because it's like the expectation that's not been clarified.
Okay.
If let's say today you are just someone who does your job and nothing but your job, then in terms of grading, for example, right, you should just be expecting the average grade.
Right.
But if today you are able to preempt, identify potential bottlenecks with the work, preempt what might happen in future, and then you get started to prepare resources, come up with contingency plans, or you have that you react with immediacy, like to solve problems quickly. These are things that makes the workplace value you because you seem like a more valuable person, able to solve problems before they occur.
Right.
And this is something that I see that many organizations really, really wish more of their workforce have, whether they are in their 40s or even in their 20s.
Okay. Well, this is quite eye-opening for me because I'm the type of person who doesn't think like that, right? I don't think about like, oh, how can I solve problems in the workplace today? Like I wake up and I'm like, give me your problems, let me solve them for you. It's more of I think about, okay, what can I do today that makes tomorrow net happy with yesterday net?
Give us an example of how does that translate into the work?
Yeah, so for example, if I'm producing an episode of a podcast, right, and I know, okay, like if I don't produce another episode this week, next week I'm going to have to produce double because the following week I'm on leave. And I have to make sure that there's an episode next week and the week after, and then probably also the week that I come back on leave so I'm not rushing. So I'll identify these little pockets of free time or these seasonal times of a little bit more lax work, and I'll be like, okay, now that things are a little bit more chill, I can forward plan, but for myself.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So you see, by doing it for yourself, you're also benefiting the organization,
Yeah, inadvertently, yeah.
right? Because the people who work with you, they would know that you are not a last minute worker.
Mm.
They know that you have a plan. You will not drop the pot, right? You will not say that you forgot.
Yeah.
So you're actually, by being the best version of yourself, you're actually giving back to your workplace.
Yeah, but there's something else that some people have pointed out, right? And it's to do with social skills, right?
Okay.
So this Redditor says, I have been an academically strong student, but truly suck at the workplace because I was both a capable, quiet worker and a people pleaser, which makes for a terrible combination. Gerald, are you a people pleaser?
I think we all do people please to a certain extent,
Okay, explain.
right? Like because we don't live in isolation. So whatever we do, like let's say if I'm taking the bus, I make space for people. Does it mean that I'm people pleasing them? I think to a certain extent, yes.
Okay.
But I would see that people pleasing becomes a problem when, let's say, certain lines are being crossed.
Okay, and
Yeah.
what kind of lines are we talking about here?
For example, if today your personal sense of security or your personal sense of values, your beliefs are being compromised, just to fit in somebody else's, what they call that, their requirements, right, or their
Right.
expectations.
Or their ideas of who you should be.
Yes, and worst of all is really putting your self-worth on the outcome of that people-pleasing behavior,
Okay.
which means that if today I don't people-please, I'm not a good person. If this person doesn't like me, I'm a person of no value. So that's a line that shouldn't be drawn, right?
Okay.
So what I mean by we all people please in a certain way is I'm generalizing it to say that, all of us in the workplace, we all exist to collaborate and work with each other. We do need to learn to work together well, learn to collaborate. Yeah.
Okay. But is it possible to thrive in the workplace as a quiet people pleaser like this Redditor here? Because I understand how it might work for loud people pleasers, the kind of person that exists almost as if to make everyone's lives easier, but they also like to let everybody know that they're doing things, right? But for somebody who's a quiet worker but also a people pleaser, is there any potential for them to find their place or find success in the workplace?
Yeah, I met many people who are like that actually. So they're quiet, they do their work very well, they're very dutiful, and I think they're excellent workers. And many companies depend on them to be like that.
Right. I mean, I would imagine if I had someone working for me who was quietly making sure that my entire day was smooth, like I would really treasure that person.
But I think when this particular comment about social skills, right, maybe it becomes the part about visibility.
Okay.
Like, you can be really good in your work, but you're not visible in your work. Then how do you become more visible so that you get ahead? If not, everybody else might be getting ahead of you and they may not be putting as much effort.
Do these people typically get promoted in the workplace? Because I can't imagine it's easy for their managers or their boss to see the value they put in if they're always being quiet.
Yeah, I would say that very often when it comes to promotion, visibility does play a part. It does play to a certain extent. Personally, I don't think it should because, outcomes are just as important. And that's why managers and companies, they must find that balance, right?
So how do I make myself visible? I mean, I know I'm a very visible person, but let's say for me, if I was to try to be a quiet people pleaser next week, but I still want my boss to know that I'm doing the work, right? How do I go about doing that?
Like what we mentioned before earlier about the proactiveness. I think that's a really, really big one. When you go beyond your work a little bit more, and people wonder why you're doing that little bit more, that's adding to that visibility. I think also whenever there are problems that come up with the workplace and people are just looking for a show of hands of who will step up to do those work, I think that's where it's a good opportunity to become more visible that way. Visibility doesn't always mean that you have to report to everybody what you do and to brag about your achievements and how much you managed to achieve, but it's really about maybe meeting the needs of the organization and the people, the team around you, your supervisor. I think that's more important.
So something about this Redditor's comment, right, struck me because despite this thread being about, finding trouble fitting in the workplace after having a successful run at school, they still describe themselves as a capable worker. So I'm wondering why they think they're a capable worker, but they're still having trouble in the workplace.
Yeah, I think Perhaps it's how this person views success at the workplace, right? You can be capable in what you do, but you really don't like what you do, for example.
Okay.
And then that to this person is like, I'm not being successful because I'm not being true to who I am.
Okay.
That's one, right? And there can be many, many reasons.
But it's also to do with, everybody has a different idea of what success in the workplace should look like.
Yeah. What is your ideas of success at
I mean,
workplace?
for me, success in the workplace means I get promoted. I'm writing a list, boss. So promotion, I get salary increment. I get more leave days. All of these kind of things. But I can understand that some people might not value the same things, or some people might falsely put value on these things when actually those things come and they don't quite, satisfy.
Yeah, what we value does change across our life stage. So like, for example, some people might value about the culture fit, right? Valuing being accepted by the team and by the boss more than the promotion. I mean, I've heard my fair share of people who say, I don't need a promotion, but I really like working in this team.
Right.
I really like the work environment. I like how the team is very respectful. I like how my boss values me and trusts me, doesn't micromanage me. And that means a lot more than promotion.
Right.
Yeah, because sometimes you know what they say, right? Promotion is a 5% increment and 50% more work.
Okay, then I take it back. I don't want a promotion. On that note, right, I feel like it's a good place to start thinking about how then can I, with my strengths and weaknesses, make sure that I find a role or a career that works for me, right? One that fits my capabilities but also fits my pace of work.
This is like the magic question, right? The holy grail of all questions, right? How do we find a career that fits us, right? The perfect job,
Okay,
right?
so we have some comments here from people online. So one Redditor said, what you just need is the right environment. Think of how structured school is and look for an organization where you can excel with a predefined scope. Now, I want to ask first before we get into this, right? How realistic is it that you can find a job with such a predefined scope of work that it almost feels like school?
JDs these days are not very reflective of the actual work being done, right?
Okay.
So already by that note, we know that, hey, the job does change. What you see is not what you get. Even though you join a job, you might be doing certain things for a few months and then suddenly restructuring and your job role changes. So these days, it's quite unrealistic, I would say.
Okay. But, if we were to be in that position in the interview, right, how can you suss out beyond the job description that this role, this job is one that you will be able to thrive in? Are there certain things that you can ask?
Asking about typical day, how
Okay.
the work is like, asking a little bit about the workplace environment, because this person is talking about environment, right? So I think these are good questions to find out. Interviews are a bit of hit and miss. Sometimes you get politically correct answers. So go and get your own reference checks. Ask people who work there. Reach out to people on LinkedIn, right? Like just to tell them that you are considering options and you just wanted to know how it's working life there like. Some people will say use certain platforms like Glassdoor to find out, or use Reddit, right? Since there's a Reddit thread on this company.
One thing that I like to do during interviews is I like to ask, let's say after I pass probation or at the end of this 6 months, 3 months, what have I done or what could I have done to make you confident that I was a successful hire, that I did a good job? And that usually, I find, gets interviewers speaking or describing things outside of what they've put down in the job description. Sometimes softer skills, sometimes they reveal things about how fast they would like me to get on board, what they would determine as the ideal candidate for this job, right? So I think that's something that people can consider.
When you ask a question, look out for the interviewer's response.
Oh, yes.
Because sometimes the response is very telling. Who answers, how they answer, it gives you a good sense of even how much weightage you put on the answer as well.
So we have another comment here from somebody who, is trying to advise on how to find the right role for you, right? This person says, usually companies need people to solve problems, but not to just follow instructions like in school. Train yourself to change concepts and behaviors to think of how to solve the problems there. So how do we get to that point, right? What are the concrete steps that we can do to, like this commenter said, train ourselves to become a problem solver in the workplace?
Then, I love this comment. Really, really love it, because I do think that this is something that we need a lot more of if we're going to be more excellent workers, right? So before we know how to solve problems, I think we need to identify problems.
Okay.
Right? We need to learn to see within our work scope of work, what are the challenges that are there? Are we doing things inefficiently, or are we doing things in a way that's outdated, or error prone? When you identify the right problems, then that makes it a lot easier to know how to solve them, right? When you can solve them by yourself, or you can rope in, your supervisor to figure out, like, is this a worthy problem to solve?
Right. But how do I know that I'm not overreaching? How do I know I'm not coming into workplace and pointing at something and then my manager just thinks, "Why, you first day come here?"
Yeah.
And then you immediately telling me what I'm doing wrong?
Yeah.
Like,
I've got a little story on that, right? Like, on my first day of work, I remembered, I was given this legal document to read. And I was reading for this colleague that was on leave, and then I kind of like scrubbed through the document and I found some mistakes on my first day.
On your first day, okay.
And then I told my boss that, you know what, this is some of the mistakes that I found. And my boss was shocked because she didn't expect my colleague to not have picked it up.
Okay.
And then I didn't know what to do because I was like, okay, I'm here doing my job, right? But I kind of like I felt like I got my colleague in trouble because he was doing this and he was a lot more experienced than me, right? If it helps the company, if it helps my colleague to not make the mistake, I think it's fair. But sometimes we ourselves try to, I don't know, we second guess ourselves, or we worry too much about like each other's comfort. So I think there is a fine balance if we know how to figure out that balance.
But that's an outlier situation, right? Most people don't come in and immediately identify the problems. But is that something that you should be gaining over time?
You need to be observant and look out for your colleagues and find out what are some of the things that they may need help with. Sometimes it's okay to just ask them, like, is there something they can do? I would say do it the best way that you can within your own scope, right? Don't overdo it. Yeah. What I mean by overdoing is because, like I said, people could get offended by what you're trying to do. They might read into your actions and misinterpret your intentions.
We have one more comment here. This Redditor says, keep an open mind, accept feedback and opinions from others who are quote-unquote lesser than you, and you will do better over time. Most importantly, don't think that you are better than others. So stay humble, keep learning, and it will become better. Do you think that there are some people who actually, they did well in school and they have a certain frame of mind coming into the workplace, and coming in at the bottom of the totem pole actually shocks them into not doing as well as they can?
Yeah, I do think so. I do think so. Have you met people like that before?
Well, not personally. I don't really surround myself with the straight A types. But when you see these people, what does it usually take to get them back on the right path?
I think it's part of the learning process. So like the school environment and the work environment, they're very different. So if someone who's entering the work environment, they have to learn the rules. It's like a playground. Right. You got to learn how to play and who to play with, who to interact, who to collaborate with.
I guess it kind of doesn't matter whether you're coming straight out of school or from another job or another company, but it's a good idea to take a step back first and observe how people do things, how people do execute job functions that might be similar to things that you have to do. And then learn from there.
I mean, like we've heard from our own podcast from CEOs before, where they said, when they come in, what they try to do is they try to not shake up too many things. The urgent things they have to shake, they will shake quickly, but most of the times they try to understand and learn the organization first. Right? And then to trust the people, the processes that are there before they come in to implement their changes. So I think there's some wisdom in that.
Okay. Well, Gerald, I think this is as good a place as any to end off our conversation for today's episode. For all of you who are watching or listening, if you have any questions about the workplace, why not send them our way? We are at cnapodcast@mediacorp.com.sg.
I'm Gerald.
And I'm Nat. Remember, you might not call it school, but keep learning on the job.